In the Israel Museum, they have a number of things that relate to the life of Jesus. But one in particular is the ossuary of Caiaphas, the high priest. During that time, when Jewish people died, they would have laid them in a burial chamber and wrapped their body. And after a year, the body itself has decomposed and what's left are the bones. And they would take those bones and put them in an ossuary, a bone box. And they found the ossuary of Caiaphas.
They have several ossuaries in that wing, and so you can actually compare. There are some that are very, very simple. And there's actually the ossuary of a crucified man that has a remnant of his ankle bone with the nail still in it. That ossuary is very plain compared to Caiaphas's. Annas and Caiaphas, they were the high priests, and I say that because really Annas was the high priest. According to the Jews, that was a role that you held for the duration of your life. But from the Roman perspective, that was a title they passed along to different people. The way that that political family maintained that role was to make sure that from the Roman perspective, different younger men within the family would rotate the title, but functionally, Annas was the one behind all of that, pulling the strings in the background. What the Gospels explain to us is that the men in that family had actually prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and they had been looking for opportunities to arrest him and kill him.
Well, Judas provided that opportunity for them. He approached them and said that he would be able to give Jesus over to them, identify him for them. And so that's exactly what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane. And of course, Jesus then was arrested, and he was brought to the house of Annas and Caiaphas, which would have sat on the western hill in the city of Jerusalem. It was a place that was high on the hill. Important people of the city would have lived there, and that's the location that we visited.
After Jesus was arrested in the garden, they would have led him up this way to the home of Annas and Caiaphas to begin that night of series of trials to condemn him. Now, we're in a spot that you think is really important to that story.
We're at the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu. And Gallicantu is Latin for the cock crowing. So this is the traditional location of where the house of Annas and Caiaphas was located, the same location where Peter denied Christ while he was here.
Now, from this spot, I can see the Mount of Olives and a spot just above where the Garden of Gethsemane was. There's an ancient, it looks like a first century road behind us. How would that have played a role in that night?
That road led from the upper city to the lower city here in Jerusalem. If you'll notice in the scriptures, Annas and Caiaphas and the people that were here did not seem to be surprised that Jesus showed up in the middle of the night.
Right.
Well, it's because they could see him coming. From here, you would have the vantage point of being able to see the torches in Gethsemane, and then as they led Jesus here. And this road that's behind us was probably a road that Jesus was led up.
Both Annas and Caiaphas could have looked out from their house, and they would have seen those torches go to the garden and then start making their way back toward them. And they would have known that their plot to arrest Jesus and ultimately kill him was in motion.
There's some things inside this building that I think give some credibility to this being an approximate location. Jeremy, look at this door. It's a picture of Jesus, and he's instructing Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times. And of course, we know Peter does that. Come on inside. Jeremy, one of the reasons why they feel like this could possibly be a location of the house is the fact that they found these 5th century Byzantine mosaics here. And if the Byzantines built a church here, they must have thought this site was important as well. Jeremy, here's a hole in the floor that sits above this holding cell down here. A prisoner would have been let down with ropes into this area. When we get down there, you'll be able to look up and see this from below.
So you're saying that the Byzantine church was built on top of this 1st century dungeon. There are a couple of hours when his trials with Annas and Caiaphas were completed and before the Sanhedrin could meet in the morning. It's likely he could have been held in a place like this.
Even for important Jewish leaders, it would have been out of the ordinary for them to have a holding cell down in the bottom of their house. Whoever lived here was someone of importance who would have been in a position that they would have had the need to hold prisoners for either a trial or some sort of hearing.
On top of that, you have a number of mikveh, religious baths on the front of the property, which indicates that this person is a person of means, they're a religious person, and other than ordinary people, they have what they perceive to be a need to hold people and restrain them down in the basement.
Jeremy, we're down in this holding cell underneath the bottom of this church. You can see up above this hole that we saw earlier. This would have been the hole that they would have let down a prisoner into this holding cell. This hole was originally a mikveh, which was a ritual bath, but it's obvious that it's been cut deeper for the purpose of holding a prisoner down here.
How ironic that a place where they would have been coming down to get ceremonially clean is a place where they would have lowered a prisoner and held them for a while.
This would have been a very dark, lonely place for anybody who would have been down here.
I've done work in prisons, and in almost every prison there's a place that they send them for isolation, to cut them off from everybody else. And for anyone who had been lowered down through here, the only way out, a hole in the ceiling 20 feet up, they would have felt completely isolated. And we know Jesus felt similar to that, having all of his closest associates run away from him and give up on him. It would have been a very haunting experience.
And imagine any prisoner that would have been lowered down in here with the ropes tied underneath their arms, how uncomfortable that would have been. And of course, once a prisoner got down here, they would have left the ropes up there. And so if they looked down and saw the prisoner was sleeping or something like that, they could have jerked on the rope and of course woken them up. It's just another way of torturing them.
Now, there was something else that we walked past on our way down, a room that had some ropes on the side. Now, what was that?
That was a place where they could have punished prisoners if they wanted to. They could have stretched them out with ropes tied on each arms and on each legs, where they could have whipped a prisoner or done whatever they wanted to do with them.
We know that Jesus was mistreated during his trials with Annas and Caiaphas. We know that they spat on him. We know that they struck him. There was more that was going to happen to him when he was turned over to Pilate and to Herod. But he wasn't treated well when he was with Annas and Caiaphas by any means.
No, he wasn't.
We need to try to put ourselves in Jesus' position. He's been up for a full 24 hours at this point. This is probably one of the first moments being lowered down if he were put in a place like this, where he's finally calm into himself. But how isolated he would have felt, how tired he would have felt, and how these trials were the first time during this process where they had finally physically abused him, and what that would have felt like to have been so rejected by the people he was coming to save. There's a passage over in Psalms that might help someone relate to how Jesus may have been feeling in that moment. But I, O Lord, cry out to you. In the morning my prayer comes before you. O Lord, why did you cast my soul away, and why did you hide your face from me? Afflicted and close to death from my youth up, I suffer your terrors, I am helpless. Your wrath has swept over me, your dreadful assaults destroy me. They surround me like a flood all day long, they close in on me together. You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me, and my companions have become darkness. It's really easy to imagine Jesus feeling that way in the morning hours prior to being sent over to Pilate and to Herod, as all of his apostles scattered from him, and he had been mistreated and was getting ready to be sent over.
Regardless of whether or not this is the exact location of where this happened, it's still a vivid reminder of everything Jesus went through for you and me.
It was also during this period, just on the heels of the conclusion of the illegal trials, when Judas comes back into the story. It's my personal opinion that Judas never really anticipated that this would progress as far as it did. I think he assumed that Jesus would be able to walk away from this unscathed, really similar to how he walked through the mob that was trying to throw him off the hill in Nazareth when they rejected him there. And that when he realized that it had progressed to the point in the morning where the Sanhedrin found him guilty of blasphemy and they were going to take him to Pilate, is when he rushes back to give the money back and feels such guilt over that, and they refuse to take it, that he throws it at their feet, and then he goes out and hangs himself. I really believe that Judas didn't think it was going to go as far as it did.
The story of Judas is interesting and sad. One of the overlooks that you have there at the church looks over the southern side of the Hinnom Valley. And there is a portion of land over there that's been divided off, and that's the traditional site of the field of blood, the field that was purchased with the money that Judas threw down at the priest's feet when he realized what was happening. The other thing that's interesting about Judas is the fact that we have other people during the time of Jesus' crucifixion who did things they shouldn't have. Peter denied Christ. All of the other disciples fled. However, all those other disciples came back to Jesus. Judas had that opportunity as well. He had a choice he could make. He could have easily have come back to Jesus and said, I'm sorry, but he didn't. There's a lesson for all of us in that, but it's a sad lesson that we have to learn.
In that one spot, you're reminded of Peter's denial, and you can see the potter's field where Judas chose a very different response to his guilt. He chose alienation from Christ and just wallowing in his guilt instead of coming back to a gracious Lord who forgave the one who denied him later on. I think it's a powerful place.